how do I choose a character or class to play in a World of Warcraft expansion? In this video series, I'm going to be walking through my process for choosing the character that I want to play in the upcoming War Within expansion so that you can be armed with the information that you need to make the right choice about what class to play for yourself. Hey everybody, Thor here. Back when we were moving from Legion into Battle for Azeroth, I made a video series talking about what class I was going to main for the new expansion, and it was pretty popular, and I found it very helpful for myself as well to walk through that process in a video series so that I could go into new expansion confident about the choice that I was making. This is a decision that I know a lot of people struggle with, that I have personally agonized a lot over in the past heading into a new expansion. There have been times where I haven't known what character I was going to play until I was on the login screen and I had to pick from one of my many available options. So I know that that's something that a lot of you are probably walking through as well, and I wanted to take some time in this video series to walk through this process out loud and on YouTube so that we can make this choice together, and you guys can be empowered to make your choice on your side about what character is going to be best for you. The approach that I'm going to take in this video series, and this is not the only approach to take, but it's what I use and what I find helpful, and hopefully what you'll find helpful as well, is to lay out a series of questions and then answer them in a way that guides us to the class that we're going to end up playing. So we're going to talk about 3 main questions that I think are the most important, and then a few other factors that you may want to consider if these questions don't get you all the way there to one class. So the first question that I'm going to ask myself is, what role do you want to play? This can be a multi-layered question, right? Because the classes in World of Warcraft all have different options available to them. There are some classes that can only DPS, there are some that can tank and DPS, there's some that can heal and DPS, there's some that can do all 3 roles. And so you need to ask yourself, which role do I want to focus on? And is it important to me that there are other roles that class can do that I like doing on that class as well? For me, the simple answer is I need to be able to tank. I am one of the tanks for my guild on our raid team, and so that immediately narrows down the list of classes that I'm going to be focusing on as a main character. I can't play a mage or a rogue or a warlock if I'm going to be tanking, right? And there are others you have to limit along the way as well. So for me, that immediately narrows down the pool to warrior, death knight, paladin, monk, demon hunter, or druid. So we're going to be looking at those classes later in this series in another video and starting to kind of make distinctions between them, talk about what I like, what I don't like, do some testing for those classes on the beta, and see where I want to end up landing as far as a main character for the War Within. For you, the answer to this question may be different. Maybe you really strongly prefer to play a caster DPS. That kind of narrows it down too. Maybe you like to be in the scrum of things and play a melee character. That also narrows things down too. Maybe it's important to you that you be able to fulfill all 3 roles on your main character because you like dabbling in each one and you don't want to have to set up alts to do that. The answer to this is going to vary between person to person, and I think it's an important first question to ask, but it's also one that you have to answer for yourself. Now that first question kind of rolls into the second question, which is, do you like to have multiple roles available on your main character? If you prefer to tank but also want to be able to DPS in Mythic Plus groups, then you want to pick a class that has a DPS spec that you like. If you main a healer in raid, but you also want to tank on the side with your main character, then that really narrows it down. There's only a few classes in the game that are able to do that. If you don't care about those other restrictions, then you may want to opt for a pure DPS class because that gives you the most possible DPS specs to enjoy. Ultimately, we need to decide what role do we want to play, and is it important to us to have multiple roles available? And then within that, do we lean one way or the other as far as tanking or DPS? Do you want to look at melee versus ranged as separate roles, which often they do play different roles in groups? And you have to answer those questions, and then those can kind of guide you in the right direction. Not only is it important to know if the class that you want to land on is able to do the role that you're interested in doing, the third question is, do you like the class mechanics? If you prefer playing a really fast-paced class and you want to be a DPS, then maybe something that tends to be more methodical, at least historically, like an arms warrior, might not be the best pick for you. If you want to be a caster DPS who has lots of procs and is sending out lots of instant casts, then you want to pick a class that has those mechanics in the upcoming expansion. If you want to be able to run around doing your full DPS rotation from range and run around in circles around other people around you, then maybe you want to play a Beastmaster or Hunter. The point that I'm trying to get at is you need to look at the class mechanics and say, is this something that is going to satisfy me in the long run, or is this something that's going to frustrate me about this class? This also has the layer of class difficulty. Some classes and specs are a lot easier to play than others, and some people prefer that. If you get home from a long day at work where you've been grinding hard and you just really want to sit back and relax and not think too much about the video game that you're playing, maybe you want to err on the side of playing an easier class. On the other side, a lot of players like to have a class that has layers of difficulty. Maybe there's different talent builds that are harder than others. Maybe just the baseline of the class is very challenging. Some people want to spend time developing mastery over that because they find that satisfying in their gameplay. This is a question that is, again, going to be different for everyone, but you need to think about those things as you're trying to decide which character you want to play and which class you want to play. So those first three questions cover what I think are kind of the must-haves for picking a class. If it's not covering a role that you want to play, then you definitely shouldn't pick that class. If it's really important to you to have multiple roles available, or you really want to niche down and just play one role, that's another factor that you need to consider. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're playing this to have fun, and if you don't enjoy the mechanics of the class that you're playing, whether that's a rage bar, energy bar, mana management, fast pace, slow pace, more methodical rotation, whatever the important criteria to you are, make sure that the class you're picking has those. But that's not quite enough to narrow it down to one class for a lot of people, myself included. So I'm going to go over some what I think are bonus questions that may help you kind of frame what you want to focus on or get down to one class in a way that's helpful to you. The first bonus question is, do you like the class fantasy? Now this may or may not matter to you, that's why I have this under the bonus questions section, but if you can't stand the idea of playing a character that shapeshifts into animal forms and spends a lot of time in those, then Druid's probably not the choice for you. If you can't imagine playing a character that doesn't have infinite portals all around the world, then maybe you want to play a mage. If you hate the idea of being a melee character, you probably shouldn't pick a rogue or a warrior. The fantasy that surrounds these classes and what they're able to do outside of combat in the game does matter, and matters a lot to some people. So consider those factors and kind of evaluate what the different classes you're considering have and see what's important to you. In addition to that, you may have an inkling toward, like, I want to play a class that has a strong nature fantasy or theme. In that case, a druid or a shaman or a hunter might fit that. Maybe you want to play a class who has stealth available and likes to hide in the shadows. Well, then a rogue might be a good choice. If you want to play a class that has pets, then you're looking at a hunter or a warlock. It's pretty limited in that scope. There are some other specs that can temporarily have pets out, but you know what I mean. If you want to play a class that's kind of dark and edgy, then probably warlock or death knight or demon hunter would be up your alley. If you want to be able to sprout wings all the time and fly around, then maybe you want to be an evoker. The choice is up to you, but this is a question that could maybe help you narrow down your choices a little bit. Another question you may want to consider is, do you want to be the person bringing a specific buff to your groups? If we're talking about groups that are doing serious levels of content, whether it's high mythic plus keystones or mythic raids or even heroic raids for that matter for a lot of groups, there are some things that you need to have covered. There are raid buffs that go out there. There's, of course, heroism, bloodlust, whichever faction you prefer. There's battle reses, there's health stones and gateways and all kinds of mobility tools. Is your group of friends lacking one of those, and do you want to be the person that fulfills that hole? If so, that can help you kind of narrow down maybe between two classes. Well, I really am thinking I want to play a shaman or a druid, but my group doesn't have a reliable heroism, so I'm going to play the shaman. Or maybe your group doesn't have a battle res, well, then you're going to lead toward the druid in that scenario. Another thing that I think is worth considering is, do you have a strong personal history with a specific character that really matters to you going forward? I have friends who only play one class or who very rarely dabble in alts, and for them, the connection that they have to their character and to that class is really important because it's something they've been playing for a long time, it's something that they really like to play, and for those people, like, I don't even know why they're watching this video unless they want to get a little bit of my thought process, But if that's something that matters to you, maybe you just want to stick with your historic main. If that's where you're leaning, let me know in the comments down below what your main class is and what you love most about it. The last question that I want to bring up, and one that I think is maybe controversial or less important, at least when making this initial decision, is this class good? This can be a loaded question because balance happens, and the class that's good in the first week of an expansion is not by any means going to continue to be the best class at any particular role in the long run. We can see trends emerge over the course of a season and over a longer expansion, but if you're trying to pick a class based on what's best right at the start, you're kind of setting yourself up for some frustration at some point when that class inevitably gets nerfed or other classes get buffed and leave you in the dust. Just using some examples from Dragonflight, if you were a tank at the start of Dragonflight and you went all in on Prot Warrior, only to see Prot Paladin go straight by it at the end of Season 1, Guardian Druid passed it in Season 2, and then the Demon Hunter meta emerged in Seasons 3 and 4, if you aren't the kind of person who wants to reroll, then that could leave you feeling kind of bad about picking your class based on its strength relative to other classes. Now that being said, I think choosing a class based on the meta and what emerges can be a reasonable thing to do, especially if you find yourself having a hard time getting into groups with the class that you've chosen, or if you picked a class based on all the factors that I mentioned before and it ends up just being so weak that you can't do the level of content that you want to do without jumping through all kinds of hoops and just making things much more difficult to yourself, then that may be a good reason to reroll to a class that is meta. One example, I played a Brewmaster Monk and then a Death Knight in Seasons 2 and 3. In Season 4, I decided to play a Demon Hunter because the tools that it has available right now for tanking keys are unbelievably broken compared to those other two classes, and I felt like I was just making things harder on myself and harder on my group by choosing to play those other two classes. So that can be a reason to reroll, but I wouldn't say that you should make decisions based on tuning in the beta. Tuning in the beta is often not a reflection of what's going to go live in the game, and if you rely on the choices that you're making in the beta to carry over into the game, you're probably going to be very disappointed with the first round of tuning that happens after the first raid week, or even before the first raid week for that matter. So now that I've laid out the questions that I'm going to be asking myself and some other helpful questions that you might want to ask yourself, let's talk about how I have narrowed things down. I mentioned earlier that I'm tanking for my guild going into, I have been tanking throughout Dragonflight, and going into War Within, I'm going to continue being one of our raid tanks, so I need to be able to tank on my main character. That narrows it down quite a bit, but for me, I haven't really narrowed it down beyond that point yet. I'm going to be doing a lot of testing on the beta over the coming weeks to figure out which tanks I like the most, especially with the hero talent system. There's just a lot of new gameplay loops and new gameplay styles that are fun, some that I'm not a super big fan of, and some that haven't even gotten to testing yet. So I'm going to be doing a lot of testing to try and figure out which classes I want to focus on. If I had to make a decision right now, if the expansion was launching tomorrow, I would probably be leaning toward Prot Warrior or Brewmaster Monk, but we have plenty of time and I don't have to make that decision today. So I'm going to make some more videos in this series, kind of going over what the different classes are looking like, focusing on the tank classes. If there's another class that you guys want to see me test, please let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to do some dungeons and figure that out. But for me, I'm going to be focusing on looking at different tank classes and seeing which ones have just gameplay that I enjoy the most and which ones seem like they're going to be the most fun for me to play, both in Raid and Mythic Plus, going into the War Within. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you for watching, and please consider giving us a like and a subscribe, and let me know in the comments down below what classes you are thinking of maining in the War Within. Catch you in the next one. Farewell.